My dad snorted, "He's just a janitor." When I entered my sister's engagement party, laughter broke out as my mom shook her head. Moments later, my sister's husband reached for a handshake, glanced at his phone, and froze. He whispered, "Hey, boss," while the entire room went silent. I was 28 the night my family made sure I finally understood I didn't belong among them anymore. My name's Jake, and if you asked my folks or anyone related to me what I was like, they'd probably shrug and say I was the quiet one, maybe the oddball. I never stirred up drama, but I also never managed to fit into whatever perfect version of a son my parents had in mind. I worked my way through school, got my own apartment at 19, and never once leaned on them for help. Looking back, I think that independence is what really rubbed them wrong. They couldn't control me, and that drove them nuts. My mom lived for appearances. She had this obsession with being admired, like her whole purpose was to be known as the flawless hostess and the mother who raised flawless kids. My dad was the self-appointed leader of the pack, the kind of guy who believed his opinion ended every argument. My sister, Emily, was their shining star, the golden one who could do no wrong. When she got engaged, you'd think the royal family was planning the event. There were fancy save-the-dates, a professional engagement photo shoot, and a dinner reservation at one of the top restaurants in the city. When the invitation showed up, I hesitated. I hadn't been to a family function in ages. The last time I saw everyone was Thanksgiving 2 years back, when Dad spent the night cracking jokes about how I must be too busy scrubbing toilets to pick up the phone once in a while. For the record, I'm not a janitor. I own a facilities management company, started as a side gig cleaning offices during college, but I built it into something legitimate. 15 employees, major contracts downtown, and enough profit to buy a house outright. Still, to them, I was the kid with the mop. I almost skipped the dinner, but some part of me, maybe guilt, maybe leftover hope, wanted to go. Maybe the little boy in me still wanted my parents to look at me with the same pride they reserved for Emily. So I cleaned up nice. Nothing over the top. Dark shirt, polished shoes, professional enough. As I parked outside the restaurant, I told myself to stay calm no matter what happened. Be polite. Eat. Smile for the pictures. Leave before the night turned sour. When I walked into the private dining room, every head turned my way. Emily was glowing in white, her fiancé Chris beside her, arm around her shoulders. Mom was fussing with the table like she was preparing a magazine spread. Dad was already loud, drink in hand, the center of attention. "Well, look who finally showed up," he said, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Guess the floors must be clean tonight." Laughter rolled around the table. I forced a polite smile and tried to shrug it off. But then came the line that burned into my mind for days. "He's just a janitor." Dad snorted, motioning toward me like I was the night's entertainment. Mom gave one of her fake, disappointed head shakes, and a few cousins snickered into their napkins. My face felt hot. I wanted to say something, anything, but before I could, Chris stood and offered his hand. "Hey, Jake. Good to see you, man." We shook hands, and then he did something odd. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and froze. His expression went pale, like he'd just remembered something he shouldn't have forgotten. He looked up at me again, slower this time, and his smile faded. "Hey, boss," he said quietly. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a fork hit the carpet. Mom's hand froze midair, Dad's grin vanished, and even Emily stared at us, completely lost. I didn't say a word. I just sat down in the empty chair beside Chris, calm as ever, letting that thick silence linger until it was almost unbearable. That was the moment everything shifted. I leaned back, every eye locked on me, and I let the quiet stretch a little longer than was comfortable. I've come to realize that silence can carry more weight than 1,000 words ever could. Chris's hand was still hanging awkwardly in the air, like he couldn't decide whether to sit back down or stay standing. Finally, Emily cleared her throat and asked, Babe, what was that?" Chris looked nervous, eyes darting to his phone like he regretted opening his mouth at all. "It's nothing," he muttered, sliding it back into his pocket. "Let's just sit down." But it wasn't nothing. Everyone at that table had heard him call me boss. And now the curiosity was practically humming in the air. My dad, never one to let anything slip past without twisting it to his advantage, leaned forward with that fake, booming laugh of his. "Boss?" he said, as if the word itself were the punchline. "What?" Jake's handing out mop buckets now. You guys hiring janitors, or what? There it was again, that word. Janitor. His favorite weapon, the one he always used to shrink me down to the version of me he preferred. I kept my voice calm, my face steady. No, I said evenly. I own the company Chris works for. That got the reaction I expected. Mom blinked, her perfectly painted expression tightening around the eyes. Emily shot Chris a sharp look. You work for Jake? She asked, like she'd just heard something scandalous. Chris swallowed, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Yeah, he admitted. His company manages all the facilities for my office building. He owns the contract. I didn't realize you two were related. The table fell quiet again, that same heavy silence settling over us like fog. I could almost see the frustration simmering beneath my dad's grin. He hated being blindsided. More than that, he hated when his version of the story stopped being the only one people believed. Oh, come on, he said, waving a dismissive hand. Jake's exaggerating. He probably cleans a few offices and thinks that makes him a CEO. The words hit harder than I wanted them to. It wasn't the insult itself. It was how easily he dismissed everything I'd worked for. The years of long nights, the mornings I could barely move my hands from scrubbing floors, the risk of putting every dollar I had into something I believed in. I wanted to say all that. I wanted to make him see it. But I didn't. Tonight wasn't the night for a fight. Emily jumped in, sensing things were getting tense. Can we not make this about Jake right now? She said sharply. This is supposed to be about me and Chris. And there it was, the family's golden rule. Everything had to orbit around Emily. Birthdays, holidays, even random dinners eventually became celebrations of her promotions, her vacations, her engagement. Anytime I tried to share something about my life, it got laughed off or ignored. Dinner finally started, but the air was different now. I could feel Dad's eyes on me, waiting for another opening. When the waiter brought out the first course, something tiny and fancy I couldn't even name, Dad made a show of standing, glass in hand. Let's make a toast, he said loudly. To Emily and Chris, and to keeping family humble, no matter how high they think they've climbed. The table laughed right on cue, like trained seals. I just took a sip of water and kept my face still. Mom, ever the queen of polite jabs, followed up with her own sweetly sharpened line. You know, Jake, it's so nice you could join us tonight, she said, smiling that brittle smile of hers. I was starting to think you'd forgotten where the family meets. Emily was just saying how sad it was that you missed Christmas last year. I had the flu, I said quietly. Yes, but you could have sent a card, she replied, her tone sugar-coated and smug. I didn't take the bait. I could feel that familiar tightness in my chest, the one that used to send me walking out early, but not this time. I wasn't going anywhere. I sat there, ate my food, and listened while the conversation drifted toward wedding plans and honeymoon spots. Emily pulled out her phone, scrolling through pictures to show Mom. Chris and I have our hearts set on this vineyard just outside the city, she said dreamily. It's perfect, but a little out of our price range. Dad said everyone would chip in to make it happen. I raised an eyebrow. Everyone? I asked. Mom nodded, like it had already been decided. Of course, Mom said smoothly. It's a family event. We all contribute to family events. That was news to me. Nobody had ever pitched in for anything that mattered to me. Not for my graduation, not when I bought my first house, not even when I launched my business. The one time I did ask for help, a small loan for my first contract when I was 20, Dad told me it was a bad investment and that I needed to stand on my own 2 feet. How much are we talking about? I asked, keeping my voice even. Emily beamed, completely unaware of the tension crackling around her. Well, if everyone chips in $5,000, we can book the venue by next month. $5,000. She said it like it was the cost of lunch. I did the math in my head. Mom, Dad, me, and a few aunts and uncles. That was over $30,000 for one night of fancy wine and photos. Dad looked straight at me. I'm sure you can handle that, he said. Right, Mr. Big Shot business owner? It wasn't a question, it was a dare. I didn't respond right away, just focused on slicing through my food, chewing slowly. Truth was, I could afford it. But the entitlement in his tone made my stomach turn. Nobody had ever offered me a hand. Not once. And now they were looking at me like I owed them something. Mom must have picked up on my hesitation because she reached across the table and patted my hand. Don't overthink it, Jake, she said sweetly. It's family. You can't put a price on supporting family. Those words hit me hard. Support family. I'd heard that one my whole life, usually when they wanted something from me. When I said no to lending Emily money, or when I couldn't drop everything to babysit her kids while I was working. It was never about family support. It was about me giving and them taking. The rest of dinner blurred together. More jabs, more backhanded compliments about how I'd finally made something of myself. At one point, Dad joked about putting me on janitor duty for the wedding, since I'd feel right at home with a broom. The table laughed. Everyone except Chris. He stayed quiet most of the night, sneaking glances my way, like he was still trying to figure out how the man his future father-in-law mocked was actually his boss. By dessert, my patience was paper thin. The room buzzed with chatter, but in my head it was just static, every insult replaying, every smug laugh looping in my brain. I kept thinking about that word, janitor, and how easily they threw it around. And the money, the expectation that I'd just handed over because that's what I was supposed to do. When the check came, Dad snatched it up before anyone else could. "We'll split this like usual," he said, pulling out his wallet. Then he turned toward me with that same smug grin. "Unless our little entrepreneur here wants to treat everyone tonight." The kind of joke that wasn't a joke. Everyone looked at me, waiting to see what I'd do. I smiled politely. "No," I said. "We can split it. Like usual." The air in the room shifted. Dad's smirk twitched, just for a second, before he covered it with a laugh. When dinner ended and everyone started to leave, Mom caught me by the arm. Her voice was low but sharp. "You embarrassed your father tonight," she said. "You could have just gone along with things and made it easier for everyone." I looked at her for a moment, weighing whether to say what I really thought. In the end, I didn't. I just nodded and walked out into the cool night air, my pulse pounding in my ears. I sat in my car for a long time before turning the key. The image of Chris's face when he called me boss replayed in my head again and again. For the first time in years, something inside me shifted. I didn't know what the next step was, but I knew one thing for sure. The old way of things, the way they'd always treated me, that was over. I barely slept that night. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying every sneer, every laugh, every cheap shot from dinner. It wasn't about being called a janitor anymore. It was about the pattern, the expectation that I'd always show up, bite my tongue, and foot the bill for a family that never gave a damn about me. By the time the sun came up, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to let them guilt me into paying for Emily's perfect wedding. I told myself I'd stay out of it this time, keep my distance, focus on work, let them deal with their own mess. And for a few weeks, that's exactly what I did. Business was booming. New contracts kept rolling in. I was busy enough that the memory of that dinner started to fade. Well, almost. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Asterisk family meeting Sunday. Wedding plans. Everyone is contributing. Don't be late. Asterisk no question mark. No hope you can make it. Just an order. Like I was 16 again, still living under her roof instead of running my own company. I thought about ignoring it. God knows I wanted to. But I also knew how that would play out. If I didn't show, they'd paint me as selfish, unreliable, the usual routine. So I went. The meeting was at their house, around that massive dining table they loved to show off. Emily and Chris were already there, flipping through a binder stuffed with venue brochures. Dad sat at the head of the table like some kind of corporate exec about to deliver a quarterly report. Mom poured wine like it was communion. "Good. You're here," Dad said the second I walked in. "Now we can get started." I took a seat at the far end of the table. He immediately launched into one of his speeches. This one about family unity, sacrifice, and how Emily's wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event that required everyone to pull their weight. "We've already talked to your uncles," he said, flipping a page in the binder. "They're in for $5,000 each. Your aunt's sending her contribution next week. That just leaves you." "Leaves me for what?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "For your share," Mom said in that calm, rehearsed tone of hers. "5,000 should cover it. You can write the check today, and we'll deposit it into the wedding fund." I stared at them. "You're asking me to write you a check for $5,000? Dad frowned. "No one's asking, Jake. We're telling you what's fair. You do well for yourself. And this is your sister's big day. Family takes care of family." There it was again, the phrase they always pulled out when they wanted something. "I can't do that," I said finally. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Emily's face flushed red. What do you mean you can't? She said. This is my wedding. We already put down deposits assuming everyone would contribute. If you back out now, you'll ruin everything. I almost laughed. Maybe you shouldn't plan a wedding with money you don't have yet, I said quietly. Dad's hand came down hard on the table, rattling the glasses. Don't talk to your sister like that, he barked. She deserves a beautiful wedding. And if you weren't so selfish, you'd get that. The word hit me like a slap. Selfish, I repeated, feeling my chest tighten. I've paid for everything in my life on my own. I've never asked you for a single cent. And we're proud of that, Mom said quickly, trying to smooth things over. But this isn't about pride, Jake. It's about supporting the family. We all make sacrifices for each other. Really? I asked. What sacrifices have you ever made for me? The question hung there, unanswered. Emily crossed her arms. You know what? Forget it, she said sharply. If you're too cheap to help, maybe you shouldn't come to the wedding at all. Her words landed harder than I wanted to admit. My own sister was telling me to stay away from her wedding because I wouldn't bankroll it. But the worst part? It didn't stop there. 2 days later, I got an alert from my bank. $5,000 withdrawn from an old joint account I hadn't touched in years. The one I'd opened with my parents when I was younger and just never closed. My stomach dropped. They wouldn't. They couldn't. But they did. I drove straight to the bank, had the teller pull the records, and there it was, a scanned image of the check. My mother's handwriting. For a moment, I couldn't even process it. Just this flood of anger, betrayal, disbelief, all crashing together. It wasn't just that they took my money. It was that they felt entitled to it, like it was theirs by default. That evening, I showed up at their house, walked straight inside, and said, "You took money from me." Mom's eyes widened for half a second before she regained her composure. "You weren't going to contribute," she said coolly. "So we took care of it." "You stole from me," I said, my voice low and steady. "Don't be dramatic," Dad snapped. "It was just sitting there." "You weren't even using that account," Mom said, her voice sharp with annoyance. "And it's for your sister's wedding. You should be happy to help." Something inside me snapped right then. That money was mine, I said, my jaw tight, every word coming out measured and cold. "You had no right to touch it." "You're overreacting," Mom shot back, rolling her eyes like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "You make plenty, Jake. You won't even miss it." I looked at them both, really looked, and realized that no matter how hard I worked, how much I earned, or how far I'd come, they'd never see me as anything but a wallet they could open when it suited them. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just turned and walked out. As I slid into my car, a strange calm washed over me, the kind that settles in when you finally give up expecting people to change. That night, I closed the joint account for good and transferred every remaining cent into my own. Then I sat at my desk, reviewing my company's active contracts, especially the one tied to Chris's office building. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just angry. I was focused. I wasn't planning revenge, not exactly, but I sure as hell wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. The next week passed in a fog. It was that numb kind of exhaustion that hits after a heavy blow, when your body's moving but your mind's still back in the moment everything cracked. Every morning, I'd get up, shower, put on my work shirt, and head out. I'd go through the motions, meetings, phone calls, inspections, but my mind kept flashing back to the image of that check at the bank, my mother's handwriting scrawled across it. That single moment hit harder than I ever expected. I'd always known my family treated me differently, but this wasn't favoritism anymore. This was theft. They hadn't just crossed a boundary. They'd bulldozed right over it without hesitation. Work became my only real escape. I started staying at the office 12, sometimes 14 hours a day, not because I had to, but because it helped quiet the noise in my head. Walking through the warehouse each morning, seeing my crew getting ready for the day, loading trucks, joking with each other, drinking cheap coffee before heading out, it grounded me. Those guys respected me more than my own parents ever did. But when the day ended and I drove home to a silent house, the weight of everything came crashing back. That's when the old memories started resurfacing, the ones I'd spent years trying to bury. I remembered being 16, asking Dad to co-sign a loan so I could buy a used car. He refused, said if I wanted one, I should save up like a man. So I did. I worked nights stocking shelves for a year and paid cash for a beat-up Honda Civic. When I pulled into the driveway, proud of what I'd done, he laughed and said, Hope that junker doesn't die on you, or you'll be walking again. I thought about when Emily wanted to study abroad, and they threw her a fundraiser. Family, friends, neighbors, all chipping in to support her dreams. But when I told them I was starting a business and needed a little help with startup costs, they told me to get a real job first. Every one of those moments stacked up like bricks, and this theft, was the last one that sealed the wall between us. I ignored their messages that week. The text from Mom filled with Pinterest boards of wedding decor. Emily's voicemail accusing me of being childish. Even Dad's smug text with a picture of the vineyard receipt captioned, *C, your money's going to good use. I started cutting contact in other ways too. Every Sunday, I used to show up for dinner at their place out of habit, even when I didn't feel like it, just to keep the peace. I stopped going. When Mom called asking where I was, I told her I had work to catch up on. I also muted the family group chat. No more bridal shower updates. No more of Dad's funny memes about lazy kids these days. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. Free to imagine what it might be like not to keep forcing myself into a family that never wanted me as I was. Then, a few weeks later, the invitation came. A cream-colored envelope with gold lettering showed up in my mailbox, addressed neatly to me like nothing had ever happened. Inside was a fancy card with the date, time, and location, Emily and Chris's wedding, the event I'd apparently helped pay for. The vineyard, of course. There was also a note tucked inside from Mom. Please RSVP quickly. We're assuming you'll cover your hotel room and transportation costs since you're single. Looking forward to seeing you there. I sat on my couch holding that invitation for a long time, just staring at it. The confidence, the assumption that I'd still show up, still smile, still clap for Emily like nothing had happened. It was almost funny. Almost. That night, I poured myself a drink and sat out on the back porch. The air was cool, the neighborhood quiet except for the crickets. I stared up at the stars and finally let everything I'd been holding in hit me all at once. The hurt, the anger, the disappointment, it all came crashing down like a wave. I thought about cutting ties completely, skipping the wedding, changing my number, just disappearing from their lives for good. It would have been so easy. But as I sat there, a different thought crept in. Walking away might bring me peace, but it wouldn't bring me closure. It wouldn't make them understand. They'd go on thinking they'd done nothing wrong, that I was just the sensitive one again. And that wasn't good enough. By the end of the week, the numbness I'd been feeling had burned off, replaced with something harder, sharper. I started taking quiet, deliberate steps. I closed every old financial tie I still had with them. The joint account was already gone, but I checked my credit report just to be sure there weren't any open lines or cards I'd forgotten about. I updated every password I owned. I called my accountant and talked through asset protection, making sure that from here on out, no one but me had access to a single cent of what I'd built. At work, I found myself looking closely at the contract with Chris's company. It was one of our biggest accounts, and it included a clause that allowed me to terminate services with 30 days' notice if payments were ever late. They never had been, but still, knowing I held that kind of leverage got me thinking. Then something unexpected happened. Chris called me. "Hey," he said awkwardly when I answered. "I know things got weird at that dinner. I just wanted to say, I had no idea your family treated you like that. And, if it helps, I told Emily that what they did, taking that money, was completely out of line." I was silent for a second. "And?" I asked. He sighed, and she said I was overreacting. He paused. "Look, man, I don't know what to say, but I respect what you've built. Most guys our age wouldn't have pulled off what you did." His words didn't fix anything, but they did something. They reminded me that I didn't have to stoop to their level. I didn't need to yell or make a scene. I could handle this the same way I'd handled everything else in my life, strategically, calmly, and entirely on my own terms. The next day, I RSVP'd yes to the wedding. Not because I wanted to celebrate, but because deep down, I knew I wasn't going to that vineyard as the quiet, overlooked son they thought they knew. I was going to show them exactly who I'd become, and I was going to make sure they never forgot it. That night on the porch had changed something in me for good. The pain and anger that used to eat me alive started burning cleaner, sharper, like it was being refined into purpose. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was determined. I threw myself into my business with a kind of focus I hadn't felt in years. The company had been doing fine, but I'd been coasting, comfortable with the contracts we had, content with steady income. That stopped. Now, every deal felt like an opportunity to tighten my foundation, to make sure no one could ever take anything from me again. I renegotiated 2 of our biggest contracts, locking them in for 3-year terms with rate increases that actually reflected the quality of work my team delivered. I hired 2 new crew leads so I could step back from the daily grind and focus on strategy. I also invested in top-of-the-line equipment, new floor machines, upgraded vans wrapped with our company logo, so we'd look as sharp and professional as the clients we served. Within 3 months, revenue was up 20%. I moved the business out of our cramped little office and into a proper building with a front lobby and a conference room. For the first time in a long while, everything in my life felt solid, and this time, it was mine. For the first time, I had a real office, one with my name on the door. It wasn't just a symbol of business success. It felt like a marker of who I'd become. I'd built something real, solid, mine. But the change didn't stop there. I started working out again, something I hadn't done in years. Those first few weeks were rough, muscles sore, lungs burning. But by the end of the month, I could feel the difference. I stood taller, felt stronger, sharper. I even upgraded my wardrobe, not to show off, but to finally look like the man I actually was now. No more showing up to family dinners in wrinkled shirts and worn-out jeans. I wanted to look like someone who took himself seriously, even if they never had. Meanwhile, my family's texts kept rolling in. Group messages filled with cake tastings, color schemes, menu options, seating charts. I still didn't respond much, but something had shifted. I didn't feel guilty anymore for ignoring them. I wasn't just distancing myself. I was building a life where their approval had no weight. But there was one person I couldn't quite ignore, Chris. After that awkward first call, he reached out a few more times. Small things, mostly, checking in, asking for advice about a maintenance issue at his office. It was odd at first, but eventually, I realized we were actually starting to form a kind of mutual respect. He even stopped by my office one afternoon to drop off paperwork for his company's contract renewal. When he walked in, he glanced around at the new space, bright lobby, polished floors, my framed business license on the wall, and let out a low whistle. "Jake," he said, shaking his head, "I had no idea you had all this going on. Your family really undersells you." I smiled faintly. "They always have." He hesitated, then added, "Look, I know it's not my place, but Emily's been talking like she expects you to make another contribution before the wedding. Something extra for the flowers or music or whatever. I thought you should know." My jaw tightened, but I thanked him. It wasn't a surprise. It just confirmed what I already knew. They weren't done taking. That night, after everyone left the office, I stayed behind, standing in front of the whiteboard in my office, mapping everything out. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about drawing a permanent line in the sand. I wrote down every financial tie I still had to them. The accounts already closed, the ones still open, the old insurance policies where I was listed as an emergency contact. I wanted every single thread cut before that wedding. Then I started thinking about how I wanted to show up that day. I didn't want drama. I wasn't planning some big cinematic outburst. No shouting, no table flipping. I wanted quiet power. The kind that made people stop and think. The kind that left a mark. So, I started making moves. I ordered a tailored suit, the first one I'd ever owned. Dark navy, clean lines, timeless. I bought a pair of Italian leather shoes that felt solid, almost like armor. Then I traded in my old sedan for something new, sleek, understated, but commanding enough to turn a few heads when it pulled up. And I kept working, building. By late summer, I'd landed a huge contract with a tech company downtown, one that doubled our monthly revenue overnight. I took my crew out to dinner to celebrate, sitting back as they laughed and toasted each other. In that moment, I realized these people, my employees, my team, were the closest thing I had to a real family. They showed up. They worked hard. They respected me. The better things got for me, the clearer the contrast became whenever I heard from my parents. Mom's messages started taking on a sharper edge. Asterisk, don't forget to RSVP for the rehearsal dinner. Emily stressed. Don't make this harder. Asterisk 2 days later. Asterisk need to know how much you're contributing for the music. Emily found a string quartet she loves. Asterisk I didn't respond. Instead, I poured my energy into what actually mattered, my work, my people, my peace. The night before the rehearsal dinner, I stood in front of the mirror wearing that new suit, just to see how it felt. For the first time in years, I didn't see the odd man out in a family that never made space for me. I saw someone who could walk into any room, asterisk their asterisk room, and stand his ground. I knew the wedding would be another battlefield. But this time, I wasn't showing up unarmed. The jokes, the smug little comments, the assumption that I'd just keep taking it, that I'd roll over, laugh along, and do whatever they wanted. But this time, I wasn't walking in as the quiet kid who kept his head down and swallowed his pride. I was walking in as a man who'd built something for himself, a man with his own life, his own power, his own respect, and for the first time in a long while, I was actually looking forward to it. By the time the rehearsal dinner came around, I was ready for whatever they had planned. I showed up early, not just to dodge the spectacle of a late entrance, but because I wanted a chance to read the room before the crowd filled in. The restaurant was elegant, all soft lighting and white linens, small floral centerpieces on every table. The kind of place my mom lived for. But I wasn't there to admire it. I was there to watch. The first person I spotted was Chris. He looked relieved when he saw me. "Jake," he said, shaking my hand with that tight, nervous grip of his. "Glad you came early. Can we talk for a second?" We stepped outside into the crisp evening air, away from the hum of conversation inside. He lowered his voice. "Look, I'll be honest with you. Emily's stressed, her folks are stressed, and your parents, they've been tense since the money thing. They keep saying you're going to make things right this weekend." I tilted my head slightly. "Make things right?" He nodded, looking uncomfortable. "Yeah. They think you're planning some kind of gesture. Something big. Your mom literally said, 'Jake knows what he owes this family. He'll come through.'" The words twisted something in my stomach, but not guilt. Not this time. What I felt was colder, sharper. This wasn't just entitlement anymore. This was a belief that they owned me, that I'd eventually bend like I always had. "Thanks for telling me," I said finally. "I appreciate it." When we walked back in, the rest of the family was starting to arrive. My parents swept in like they were hosting a red carpet event. Mom in her pearls, Dad laughing louder than anyone else in the room. Emily looked beautiful, I'll admit that. But she also carried that same smug confidence I'd seen in her since we were kids, the kind that comes from knowing the world will bend before she ever has to. Dinner felt like a rerun of every family event before it. Overdone toasts, laughter that didn't quite reach the eyes, too much wine. I kept mostly quiet, just listening, until I caught a piece of conversation from Mom at the next table. She was leaning toward one of her friends, voice low but not low enough. "He's finally coming around," she said. "You know how he is, so stubborn, so prideful. But I think he realizes now what's expected. We've put too much into this wedding for him not to contribute." Her friend nodded with that smug, pitying look older women give when they think they understand. "Boys take longer to mature," she said. "He'll get there." I almost laughed. Asterisk mature. Asterisk that's what they called it when I did exactly what they wanted. By the time dessert rolled out, I'd made up my mind completely. I wasn't just going to show them I wasn't their doormat anymore. I was going to make sure they felt it. And not in a way they could twist or downplay later. That night, back at my place, I stayed up late with a notebook, outlining a plan. Not revenge in the dramatic, movie sense. No shouting, no explosions. This was going to be quiet, deliberate, permanent. Step one was business. The renewal for Chris's company contract had come up recently, and I'd already signed off on the extension, but with one small addition. A new clause that required quarterly in-person review meetings with the client's management team. And guess who was now listed as the company liaison required to attend those reviews? Chris, my future brother-in-law. He knew it, too. He'd seen the clause. He just hadn't told anyone yet, probably because it actually benefited his company. But I knew what it meant. From now on, they couldn't ignore me, even if they wanted to. Step 2 was financial. I called my accountant again and told him to move everything I owned into a trust. My house, my investments, even my business shares. Everything was now legally protected and under my sole control. If anyone tried to touch what was mine again, they'd find out real quick how little access they had. If my parents ever tried something like that joint account stunt again, they'd slam straight into a wall. Everything I owned was now locked down tighter than a bank vault. And then came step 3, a small but meaningful touch. My wedding gift. I decided I would give something, but not in the way they expected. No checks. No envelopes stuffed with cash. Instead, I commissioned a local artist to paint a custom piece, a gorgeous landscape of the vineyard where the ceremony would take place. I had it framed simply but beautifully, with a small brass plaque at the bottom that read, Asterisk for Emily and Chris. May you always build your future with your own hands. Asterisk. It was polite, elegant, and just sharp enough to make the right people uncomfortable. The last part of the plan was about presents. I booked a suite at the Vineyards Hotel. Not just any suite, but the top one. Corner balcony, panoramic view of the vines, private fireplace, the whole deal. I arranged for a car service to pick me up and drive me out there in style. Not to flaunt it, but to make sure the first image they had of me that weekend wasn't the quiet, awkward son they used to dismiss. It was the man I'd become. The more I prepared, the calmer I felt. For once, I wasn't bracing myself for the usual tension of a family event. I was ready for it. I was in control. The night before I left, I got a text from Chris. Chris asterisk hey man. Just a heads up, Emily's parents are talking about asking you to give a toast at the reception. They think it'd be a nice gesture. You know, family unity, and all that. Asterisk. I stared at the message for a while before typing my reply. Me asterisk sounds perfect. I'll be ready. Asterisk because I would be. I wasn't going to dodge it or make a scene. I was going to stand there, calm and composed, and say exactly what I wanted, in my own words, on my own terms. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was the line in the sand, the moment things shifted permanently, for them and for me. I woke up early the morning of the wedding, long before the alarm. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but my mind was sharp, focused. No dread, no tightness in my chest, no anxious rehearsing of what might go wrong. Just a strange, steady excitement. When I pulled up to the vineyard, the sight honestly took my breath away. The rows of grapevines rolled out over soft hills, the early fog still clinging to the ground like silver smoke. The light was soft, gold, peaceful. I carried my bag into the suite I'd booked, and when I stepped inside, I had to stop for a second just to take it in. Polished hardwood floors, stone fireplace, big glass doors opening out to a balcony overlooking the ceremony set up below. It felt like standing inside a turning point. I took my time getting ready. Hot shower, clean shave, pressed suit. When I slid on that tailored navy jacket and those polished Italian shoes, I barely recognized the reflection staring back. This wasn't the kid who used to sit through dinners biting his tongue while everyone laughed at his expense. This was the man who'd built something out of nothing and wasn't afraid to show it. By the time I walked into the main hall for pre-ceremony photos, the place was already buzzing. Emily was in the bridal suite getting her hair done. Mom was barking orders at the florist. And Dad, true to form, was already holding a glass of champagne, even though it wasn't even 10 in the morning. The second he saw me, his eyebrows lifted. Well, he said, giving me a slow once-over. Look who finally decided to dress like he belongs here. Good morning, I said evenly, walking right past him. Mom turned, her eyes scanning me up and down. You could have told us you were bringing a car service, she said, her tone clipped. People are talking. I smiled slightly. Let them. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I'll give them that. Emily looked stunning, Chris looked proud, and for a few moments, I let myself just be happy for them. Whatever else had happened, she was still my sister, and this was her day. But when the ceremony ended and we moved into the reception, the mood shifted. The vineyard glowed under strings of fairy lights. Tables were set up outdoors beneath a wide open sky, the air warm and sweet with the smell of grapes and champagne. It looked like something out of a magazine. And as I watched everyone laughing and clinking glasses, I knew the real moment hadn't come yet. The sun had dipped low over the hills, washing the whole vineyard in soft gold. Laughter drifted through the air, the clink of glasses blending with quiet music. It was the kind of perfect, picture book moment that made what I was about to do all the more satisfying. After dinner, the DJ tapped the mic and announced it was time for speeches. Naturally, Dad went first. He cracked a few jokes, called Emily the princess of the family, then smirked and said he couldn't wait to hear what Jake had to say. That got a few laughs. All eyes turned to me. I rose slowly, buttoned my jacket, and walked to the microphone. My heartbeat was steady. No nerves this time. Just calm focus. Good evening. I began, my voice clear and even. For those who don't know me, I'm Jake, the bride's brother. And I'd like to say a few words about family. A polite chuckle rippled through the tables. I smiled, confident, easy. Not that nervous grin I'd worn my whole life around them. Family, I said, is supposed to mean showing up for each other, through the good and the bad. It's about support, loyalty, and trust. And for a long time, I thought that meant giving whatever was asked of me, letting people take what they wanted just to keep the peace. From the corner of my eye, I saw Mom go rigid. Dad took a slow sip of champagne, eyes narrowing. But what I've learned, I continued, letting my tone harden just a touch, is that real family doesn't take without asking. Real family doesn't laugh at your work or your success or make you feel small for standing on your own. Real family stands with you, not on top of you. The air went still. You could feel the tension ripple through the tables like static. I paused just long enough to let it land before softening my voice again. So tonight, I want to raise a glass, not just to Emily and Chris, but to building something that's truly yours, to creating a life with your own hands, something no one else can take away or take credit for. I turned toward Chris, lifting my glass slightly. He met my eyes and gave a tiny nod. To Emily and Chris, I finished. May you build your future with your own hands, and may it always be strong enough to stand on its own. The applause that followed was polite, subdued. Emily smiled, though there was uncertainty behind it. Mom's expression was frozen in that perfect hostess mask she wore when she was furious but couldn't show it. Dad didn't clap at all. I just walked back to my seat, calm, collected, and took a slow sip of wine. But the night still had one more act left. When it came time for gifts, they called my name, and I stepped forward with the wrapped frame. Emily tore off the paper and gasped softly. The painting caught the vineyard in full sunlight, golden rose stretching into the horizon. "This is gorgeous," she said. Chris leaned closer. "Check the plaque," she read aloud. Asterisk for Emily and Chris. May you always build your future with your own hands. Asterisk, a quiet murmur rolled through the crowd. Subtle, but noticeable. People shifted in their seats. Someone let out a soft, knowing whistle. Emily smiled faintly, but her eyes flicked toward Mom, who looked like she was holding her breath through clenched teeth. Her lips were so tight they'd turned white. I stayed through the first dance, through the cake cutting, through just enough small talk to fulfill my duties as a guest. Then, as the band started up again and the dance floor filled, I stood, slipped on my jacket, and made my way out. At the edge of the vineyard, I turned back one last time. The lights twinkled across the vines, laughter echoing under the canopy of stars. But even from a distance, I could see them, my parents, standing off to the side, speaking in low, sharp tones. Whatever they were saying, I knew one thing for sure. They'd never look at me the same way again. And for the first time, that didn't make me feel like the outsider. It made me feel like the one in control, the one holding the cards. I didn't need to witness the fallout firsthand. By the time I got back to my suite, my phone screen was glowing with messages from relatives, each one proof that the shift I'd waited for had finally begun. Some of the messages were warm, even kind. Asterisk, that was a great toast. Asterisk, asterisk, really classy man. Asterisk, asterisk, you looked sharp tonight. Asterisk, asterisk, proud of you. Asterisk, others were less forgiving. Asterisk, your speech was inappropriate. Asterisk, asterisk, you humiliated your father. Asterisk, asterisk, real men don't air family business in public. Asterisk, asterisk, you better fix this before tomorrow's brunch. Asterisk, those last ones came from my parents, of course. I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because, for once, I didn't feel any obligation to. I wasn't going to chase after peace I didn't break. I wasn't going to glue the cracks back together just to make everyone else comfortable. The next morning, I skipped the brunch entirely. Instead, I sat out on my balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the vineyard staff clean up the mess from the night before. There was something poetic about it. The tables stripped bare, the lights dimmed, the party over. Just the quiet work of moving on. When I finally checked my email, one new message caught my eye. It was from Chris. Chris asterisk asterisk Jake. Just wanted to say your words last night really landed. Emily and I talked after you left. She's upset, but I think deep down she knows you were right. I'm going to work on helping her see that. And for what it's worth, I'm proud to call you my boss and my brother-in-law. Asterisk, I leaned back in my chair, letting that settle in. Maybe Emily would come around. Maybe she wouldn't. But the fact that Chris understood, that he got it, that meant something. A few days later, back in town, I fell easily into my routine. Work, the gym, quiet evenings at home. Life moved forward. My parents, on the other hand, couldn't seem to. Mom called one evening, leaving a voicemail that was half disappointment and half manipulation. Asterisk, your father and I are very disappointed in you, Jake. We expected more. You embarrassed this family. You owe us an apology if you ever want to be welcome in this house again. Asterisk, I listened to it twice, then deleted it. After that, I blocked both their numbers. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no grand finale. Just a quiet click, like closing a book I'd already read too many times. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects started to show. The family group chat went eerily silent without me in it. Then one afternoon, my aunt called. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper as she told me Mom had been complaining to everyone. But, surprisingly, a lot of people had taken my side. Honestly, she said, I think people are tired of them making everything about Emily. What you said at that wedding. Someone needed to say it. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until that moment. Then, about 3 months later, Chris walked into my office for one of those quarterly contract reviews. We went through the usual business updates, shook hands, and just as he was about to leave, he said quietly, Emily wanted me to tell you she's sorry. I looked up, caught off guard. She won't say it to your parents yet, he went on, but she told me to pass it along. Said she's been thinking about what you said and how she's leaned on them her whole life. She's starting to wonder if she needs to grow up a little. I didn't say much, just nodded. But inside, something softened. Maybe my words hadn't just stirred trouble. Maybe they'd actually planted something worth growing. That night, as I locked up the office and stepped out into the cool evening air, I realized I felt lighter. Not because my family had suddenly changed or because things were magically better, but because, for the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of trying to earn their approval. I'd shown them who I really was. They could either learn to respect that or live with the silence I'd left behind. Months later, around Christmas, I got a card in the mail. No return address, just my name written neatly on the front. Inside was a photo of Emily and Chris standing in front of a small house. Nothing fancy, but theirs. Beneath the picture, written in Emily's handwriting, were 3 simple words. Asterisk, built it ourselves. Asterisk, I stood there in my kitchen for a long moment, just looking at it. A slow smile crept across my face. For the first time in years, I felt like my sister finally understood. I poured myself a glass of wine, lifted it toward the window, and said softly, here's to building it ourselves. And just like that, I closed that chapter, quietly, cleanly, and completely on my own terms.